Across the history of gaming, the existence of good, bad, and middling endings has become increasingly widespread. However, not all of these are telegraphed as simply as choosing the blue or red dialogue option. Sometimes diverging paths are shrouded in seemingly innocuous dialogue choices or character decisions, or even require the player to carry out actions so unintuitive and arcane that a bad ending is all but guaranteed on the first playthrough. With that in mind, I'm Joe from WhatCulture.com, and here are 8 video games where the best ending is impossible. Number 8. Resident Evil Revelations 2. The endings to 2015's Resident Evil Revelations 2 hinge on a single action made by the player in its 3rd episode, and by toying with the player and their prior knowledge of the 2 central protagonists, Capcom had many of us falling for a devious bit of subterfuge. The game follows Claire Redfield, Resident Evil mainstay and survivor of the Raccoon City incident, and Moira Burton, a charity worker and daughter of Barry, you were almost a Jill sandwich, Burton. During her childhood, Moira accidentally shot and injured her younger sister with a gun that the ever-attentive Barry had left lying around, and as such has a hatred and fear of firearms. Her gameplay is therefore based primarily around using her trusty crowbar for puzzle solving and melee support. During the final boss fight of Episode 3, Claire and Moira are knocked down by a mutated Neil Fisher, and a QuickTime event flashes up prompting Claire to grab a nearby gun and execute him. Following the on-screen prompt will set in motion a series of events that sees Moira crushed under rubble, succumbing to her fears. However, if the player ignores the prompt and instead switches to Moira, who hates and fears guns, may I remind you, they can have her crawl towards the gun and finish Neil off herself. This results in Moira overcoming her fears and surviving the collapse of the rubble later on. It's complicated and pretty obtuse, but it's Resident Evil. What else would you expect? Number 7. Papers, Please. Lucas Pope's bureaucracy and poverty simulator, Papers, Please, has an impressive 20 endings, only 3 of which could be argued to be good. The first 17 end with either your arrest, death, or arrest and sentencing to death, while the final 3 all present some degree of cautious optimism. Will you stay unwaveringly loyal to your oppressive nation and keep your job at the expense of your principles? Will you escape with your family to a neighbouring country that may not be much better than your home? Will you aid a revolutionary force that could be just as corrupt as the regime they overthrow? Decisions. Escaping to the neighbouring Obristan requires the player to illegally confiscate up to 6 Obri passports without being caught by officials, which will likely lead to wage deductions or arrest. Given the eagle-eyed nature of your superiors, this is no easy task. Helping the Order of Ezek to overthrow the Arstotzkan government is even more complex and risky. The player must allow several Ezek insurgents into the country, poison an anti-Ezek assassin, and detain a foreign diplomat whilst allowing another Ezek agent through the checkpoint in disguise. If caught by Arstotzkan officials at any point during the game, you're immediately arrested and it's back to the start. Without some serious espionage chops, there's little hope for you. Number 6. The Cave. Developed by Tim Schafer's Double Fine Productions and helmed by Ron Gilbert, the man who pioneered the adventure game genre during LucasArts' formative years, there was good reason to be excited for 2013's The Cave. The game was met with mixed reviews and proved somewhat disappointing, most notably regarding its simplicity considering it was written by a figurehead known for his sophisticated and labyrinthine puzzles. Centering on 7 disparate characters who are lured into a sentient cave that wishes to explore their darkest secrets, the game has players choose 3 characters to navigate the environment. On their journey, each character is confronted by their respective desires and unavoidably commits a grave sin in order to receive their most prized possession. Upon exiting the cave, the player is admonished for their sins and can start the game again with different characters in order to, once again, be admonished for their sins. There is, however, a way to avoid such a dressing down and secure a good ending to the game, though it's not what anyone would call obvious. This being written and directed by Gilbert, surely there's an ingenious and obscure puzzle that allows the player to avoid committing the character's sins? Nope. Upon reaching the end, attempt to give the prized possession back to the clerk 3 times in succession. That's it. No hint that this would make any sense, nothing. Coming from such a brilliant and influential game designer, that's both unintuitive and a little bit lazy. Number 5. Oddworld, ABE'S Odyssey. A grim exploration of corporate greed and ecological decimation in pursuit of profit, capitalism sucks, mobilize your union, wrapped up in a quirky and blackly comic puzzle platformer, ABE'S Odyssey provided players with 2 potential endings. Depending on how many of the 99 Mudokons the player rescues from enslavement by meat-processing giant rupture farms, Abe is either rewarded for his heroic actions or brutally punished for his selfishness. This all sounds simple in theory: liberate workers, ruin CEOs, live free. However, the game's incredibly high difficulty makes this no simple task, resulting in many Mudokons accidentally being led down bottomless pits or into the paths of patrolling sligs. To add to this, many of the Mudokons are contained in secret areas which are extremely easy to miss. The real kicker though? It isn't until halfway through the game that the player learns that they even need to save Abe's co-workers. By this point, it's likely that the player will have missed many of the potential Mudokons, making reaching that 50 rescue goal even more challenging. Save for an offhand comment in the game's manual mentioning that saving enough Mudokons turns you into a god, it's likely that at the end of their first playthrough, most players were treated to the sight of our working class hero being dropped into a meat grinder. Number 4. Final Fantasy X-2. Poor Tidus. After seeing his home destroyed and embarking on an epic quest to defeat a gigantic unknowable evil with his newfound friends, he finds out that he was actually a ghost all along and must sacrifice his spirit in order to defeat sin for good. After a tearful goodbye with love interest Yuna, he heads off to the far plane and the credits roll. However, a post-credits scene shows Tidus swimming to the surface of a large body of water, hinting at his return. How unfair it must have seemed when most players of spin-off Final Fantasy X-2, expecting an emotional reunion between Tidus and Yuna, reached the end of the game only for this not to happen. Turns out though, this reunion is possible, but it requires the player to talk to a specific character in Chapter 3 and then press X several times, completely unprompted, while walking in the flower field in the far plane, until whistling is heard. At the climax of the game, a character will appear and the player will have to give them an affirmative answer, later being treated to a post-credits scene in which a resurrected Tidus reunites with Yuna. Oh, and to get the perfect ending? All of the above, plus 100% completion. Possible? Just about. Likely? Absolutely not. Number 3. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. There is some debate as to which ending to The Witcher 3 is the best one, not to mention all the smaller outcomes regarding the lands of Nilfgaard, Skellige, and the Northern Realms. The game can either end happily with Ciri ascending to the throne of Nilfgaard, using her power to effect positive change on the land, or joining Geralt on the Witcher's path. While these can both be argued to count as the perfect conclusion on either a micro or macro level, seeing Ciri continue her adventures with her surrogate father is what many would likely prefer. However, both of these endings are dependent on the player making several dialogue options throughout the game that conceal sneaky moral choices. On the surface, it might seem like a good idea to tell Ciri to remain calm during a moment of intense anger, to accompany her in a nerve-wracking meeting with the Lodge of Sorceresses, or to reassure her that she doesn't need to excel at everything when she blames herself for the death of Vesemir. In actuality, you're suppressing her free will, undermining her self-confidence, and keeping her fixated on her failures in these instances, weakening her resolve and resulting in her death during the confrontation with the White Frost. While all these decisions may seem well-intentioned, the player has doomed Ciri, and possibly Geralt, to a grisly fate. Number 2. Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain. Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, a Hideo Kojima production directed by Hideo Kojima, was the culmination of almost 30 years of stealth gaming and the final realization of Metal Gear as an open-world epic. Sadly, due to an increasing rift between Kojima and publisher Konami, the final game was heavily cut down, featuring countless repetitive missions and an ending that could charitably be described as abrupt and unsatisfying. Even the true ending, in which Big Boss discovers he is in fact the nameless medic from prequel Ground Zeroes having undergone intensive plastic surgery and brainwashing, feels more like a cruel twist than a satisfying conclusion. However, the collector's edition of the game contained details of a mission that was removed, titled Kingdom of the Flies. Taking place after the events of the campaign, the mission would see Snake pursuing an escaped Eli and several other child soldiers through Central Africa after the hijacking of Salanthropus. This chapter would have provided closure for several unresolved plot threads, such as the aforementioned hijacking, and allowed development of several characters leading to their appearances in later chronological events in the series. In this context, the best ending is impossible, because it isn't in the game. Of course, we also have the nuclear disarmament ending, which could only be triggered when all players worldwide dismantled all their nuclear weapons, something we'll never legitimately see because, much like real-life war profiteers, we all suck. And number 1, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Completing Sekiro's story as normal results in the immortal Severance ending, in which Lord Kuro's immortality is severed and he is sacrificed to end the dragon rot sickness spreading across the land. The bittersweet purification ending, in which Wolf sacrifices himself, requires the player to eavesdrop on multiple characters repeatedly in a very specific order. Whilst this is certainly convoluted, the return ending, widely regarded to be the true ending, can only be obtained by doing the following. Okay, deep breath. Acquire the Holy Chapter Infested. Talk to the Divine Child of Rejuvenation and receive rice. Eat the rice, leave the area and return. Acquire and eat more rice until the Divine Child falls asleep. Ask for rice again, then leave the area and return. Exhaust the Divine Child's dialogue and then give her a persimmon fruit. Ask for rice one more time and receive rice for Kuro. Give the rice to Kuro before defeating the Divine Dragon. Rest and speak to Kuro again to receive 2 sweet rice balls. Travel to the Divine Child and give her the Holy Chapter Infested. Rest so that she travels to the Illusory Hall. Travel to the Illusory Hall and talk to her. Travel to Senpu Temple and retrieve the Holy Chapter Dragon's Return from a random corpse. Rest and travel back to the Divine Child, who is now back at the Inner Sanctum. Give her the Holy Chapter Dragon's Return. Retrieve both fresh serpent viscera and dried serpent viscera. Give the Divine Child both items. Rest, then eavesdrop. Talk to the Divine Child and receive Frozen Tears. Continue the game to the end, defeat the final boss, talk to Kuro and give him the Frozen Tears with the Divine Dragon's Tears. Whew! It's safe to say that anyone who claims to have achieved this without constantly looking over at the Sekiro wiki is an outright liar. And there we have it, 8 video games where the best ending is impossible. Can you think of any other games where you just seem doomed to fail? Let us know in the comment section down below, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, etc, etc, etc. For now, I've been Joe. I logged off Twitter because I value my mental health. You can check out my dog on Instagram at Daphne_Greyhound. So until next time, take care.